My name is Umberto Boncristiani and this is InsideTheHive.tv, the show that takes you into the world of bees. If you like bees and want to know more about them, please consider to subscribe and also hit the bell button so you don't miss a single video. Varroa destructor, the #1 honeybee killer in the world, start to develop some sort of resistance to Amitraz, our last resource in treatment against Varroa. Luckily, there are people studying that, like Dr. Frank Rinkevich from USDA in Baton Rouge. And I was lucky enough to bring him to the show and ask him all kinds of questions about the subject, like what's going on, where, how much, what can we do about it, there is hope, any kind of things. One thing, I think the video might be a little longer, but there is a lot of value there, and I advise you to stick with me because you want to hear what he has to say.
That's what we're trying to answer with this survey. So this is the first time we've looked at Amitraz sensitivity in mites outside of the lab. So we went to commercial beekeepers from Louisiana, New York, and South Dakota, and we looked at Amitraz resistance in their mites by using two different methods. We used one method, it's a bottle bioassay, where we use technical grade Amitraz. And then we have another assay where we use apivar strips to determine mite drop efficiency. So it's two different measurements, and we're trying to make sure that they're saying the same thing, that resistance to Amitraz and is occurring, and it is in the field. So when we did this experiment, we were all over these states, and we went into almost 20 different apiaries, and we could only find mites in just a little bit more than half of them. So what that's telling me is that Amitraz is still effective in half the commercial apiaries that we went to. The other ones that we did find the mites in, we found a whole range of resistance. We found some mites that were not resistant at all. We found some mites that had very low levels of resistance. Then we found a few instances, very few, only 2, of very high levels of resistance and probable control failures for Varroa. So the overall, there isn't very much Amitraz resistance. Now that can mean 2 things. Either there isn't very much resistance out in the field, or we're coming up on a peak where we're riding this wave, and maybe those low levels this year might be intermediate next year, and in 2 years it might be very high. That's the important thing of doing this monitoring on an annual basis and over a broader geographic area with much more beekeepers, because the more data we have, the more we'll be certain of our results. So overall picture, very, very few isolated cases of Amitraz resistance.
I got some questions from beekeepers that contact me, and they're trying, I think they look at part of your presentation or something. They have questions regarding they are questioning if it is resistance or misused. Can you elaborate on that?
So yeah, resistance versus misuse, that's an interesting thing. So what we're doing is we're using, like I said, we have 2 different measurements. We're using technical grade Amitraz. So this is Amitraz in its purest form with no other solvents, adjuvants, or other materials applied. So we know that if there is a change in resistance sensitivity to that active ingredient, we could say it's Amitraz resistance. Now, there are many different formulations out there that people are using,
Sure.
But we're getting at the fundamental active ingredient. So when we see that there is less sensitivity to the active ingredient, we can convincingly say that there is Amitraz resistance.
Can you tell us about the assay a little bit? Because people are also asking me about how the assay works, and they're having thoughts regarding is the assay the same way they're doing, or they're trying to find, they're trying to understand how you measure these things. I don't know if you can share of that, some photos,
yeah,
something that you have done.
Let me share this slide real quick so you can see what that looks like. Okay, could you see that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so what we have here is in the little bottles, those are about 20 milliliter vials. And on the inside, they're coated with Amitraz. Like I said, the technical grade active ingredient Amitraz. We then add 10 mites in each of those vials. And then we add a white-eyed pupa. As you can see on that image on the right, the mites crawling on that pupa. And what we do is we allow them to crawl on that surface for 24 hours and then come back and measure how many mites have died at different concentrations. So each of those cluster of vials represents a different concentration of Amitraz. So we could do a dose response curve to the active ingredient in the technical Amitraz, and then we could measure changes in sensitivity or resistance to Amitraz. So that's kind of how the assay works.
Okay, so just for me to recap, you go to, I don't know how many commercial apiaries around the country and do the same measurement in site with them. You do not transport those mites or anything like that to the lab or something?
No, so we actually bring these mites back to, when we were doing this, we brought them back to our hotel room where we had an incubator. So in that incubator, it's at a certain temperature and humidity, and we just need to keep those conditions the same between apiary to apiary. At least in this assay, we're trying to do that. I haven't investigated to see if temperature affects this particular assay, but because we don't have that data, I'm just trying to be consistent. So yeah, these were brought back into our hotel and put into an incubator.
Interesting work. How many places have you been around the country?
So we were in Louisiana, New York, and South Dakota. And in those three states, we looked at 11 different commercial beekeepers, and we looked at 19 apiaries in those 11 operations. So we had a pretty good sampling of different types of operators and different locations.
How many more to complete the project? Do you have a specific number and different locations? Are you going to California?
Yeah, so that's the next question is that, so I thought we'd find a lot more Varroa in our sampling. So I definitely need to find some more because like I mentioned, 5 out of the 11 operations that we went into, we didn't find any Varroa. So when we went to these commercial operations, we wanted to make sure, we were trying to find Amitraz resistance. So we said that they have to have a history of Amitraz use, because if not, then we're not going to really see resistance. There wouldn't be selected for it if there's no Amitraz being used. So that reduced our field of participants. So we want to make sure that we're using commercial beekeepers that do use Amitraz. And so that was interesting. I thought when we went into them, we found that almost half of them, we couldn't even find mites. So what that telling us is that Amitraz is still providing an effective level of control in half of the operations that we looked at. We have a pretty good idea. It's supposed to be an octopamine receptor agonist. That means it binds to that receptor and activates it. However, if you look at other animals in which there is Amitraz resistance, specifically the cattle tick, a resistant strain of the cattle tick had a mutation in a tyramine receptor. And that's very, very similar to an octopamine receptor. There's a lot of crosstalk between those receptors. So it appears to be that target site might be important for this and operating at the octopamine or tyramine receptors. They're very closely related. That's the mechanism.
I'm not a chemist, but I read a couple articles and I had a feeling, please correct me if I'm wrong, that Amitraz might be targeting many different things at the same time. And that create the possibility to make it harder to develop a resistance to a compound like that. What would you have to say?
Yeah, so that's interesting. Most insecticides do have multiple target sites. So for example, fluvalinate, the other miticide that's been used a long time, it primarily works at sodium channels on the insect's nervous system. But it could also affect different kinds of channels. So what happens is you get these, it can possibly interact at multiple different target sites. However, it mostly works at a primary target site. So yes, it might be operating in other modes of action, but most of the action is going to be happening at the octopamine receptor. Amitraz, it's a member of this really unique brand of pesticides in which it's specific to the octopamine receptors. I haven't really ran into anything that shows any other target sites or mechanisms of Amitraz. Most of what's been shown, and pretty convincingly, if you look at the pharmacology and biochemistry of it, it seems to be octopamine receptors or tyramine receptors, something in that receptor group. Not really aware of too many off-target mechanisms. So I don't really know if it really works too much at other sites. I'm really unsure. But most of what I do know about Amitraz shows that it works at octopamine receptors. Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting thing because there's not another chemistry waiting behind Amitraz to use. So we have to make sure that we're good stewards of this material. I think what we could do is we need more research, and that's kind of important because we need to find out what are the conditions that breed for Amitraz resistance, what are the beekeeping practices that are conducive to breeding for Amitraz resistance. Unfortunately, I don't have enough data to say very convincingly what those might be, but with more participation from beekeepers and other researchers, I think we can get at that. So we definitely need more samples. As far as it becoming an issue, I don't know because, like I said, I don't have enough data to say how much it is, but based on what we do have, it seems to be fairly limited. The other interesting aspect of the research that we found was that there's a lot of variation even within apiaries. So a couple of beekeepers have said that when they could treat their colonies, they treat 10 colonies, let's say, Amitraz works fine in 8 of them, but then there's these 2 more that it doesn't really work. And that's actually what we've seen in our data. So the Apivar efficacy test that we ran, it shows that these colonies have different levels of Apivar efficacy. So Apivar might be only effective in 30% effective in some, but then 2 colonies away, it could be 100% effective. So you have a lot of variation in Amitraz sensitivity within colonies. So we're trying to find out what's so specific about that one colony that they have resistant mites, but yet colonies on the pallet right next to it don't. So it doesn't seem like it's a broad issue for the whole entire beekeeping industry at this point, at least in the operation that we sampled. It appears to be restricted within an operation and even within colonies within that operation. So it's very isolated, I would say. I think it's really important to identify the characteristics that are conducive to Amitraz resistance so we could avoid it. Maybe it's using a different concentration of Amitraz. Maybe it's different frequency of Amitraz application. There's a lot of variables that go into it. What are some other materials that are used in conjunction? I know that there's oxalic and formic acid treatments out there. Also, too, maybe we could use other materials like fluvalinate or coumaphos to kind of rotate in to give them a different mode of action to slow down the development of resistance. So this is just scratching the surface right now. I think what we found, though, that we're quite certain is that, yes, there is isolated pockets of Amitraz resistance out there. It doesn't seem like it's very prevalent despite history of Amitraz uses, but we still need to figure out what causes it and how prevalent it is, especially over time, because things change very rapidly out there. Okay, are you seeing that slide right now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I mentioned about the bottle bioassay test before, but now I'm going to show you the Apivar efficacy test. So what we do is we take a scoop of bees, which is about 300 bees on average, and we put them into this 1-quart container, as you can see here. It's just a deli container that's disposable and made of plastic, so it works good for us. And what we do is on the top of it, we have a strip of apivar right here that we glue to the bottom of that cup.
Okay.
We then let that cup sit for 3 hours, and then we count the number of mites that drop. So all these little spots here are Varroa. We then count the number of mites in the drop. We then take those bees after 3 hours, put them in soapy water, and try to wash off all the rest of the mites.
Okay.
So then that gives us the total number of mites in the wash. We add that to the number of mites in the drop to get our total mites.
Got it.
We then find out how many mites fell off in the drop versus the total, and that gives us our apivar efficacy. And in the susceptible stock, we could get 100% effectiveness at 3 hours. So when we count the number of mites that drop and then wash them, 100% in the susceptible population drop after 3 hours. These are susceptible mites are the ones that we have here at the lab in Baton Rouge. We consider them susceptible because we don't treat for Varroa at the lab. We use Pauline bees that have high levels of Varroa-sensitive hygienic behavior for the most part. And we don't really import too many colonies. We'll buy queens, but we don't bring in too many colonies. And in our surrounding our facility, we pretty much inundate the area with our bees. So we don't really bring in too many mites. So we think that since they're an isolated population and they don't see Amitraz, we consider them susceptible. And that's exactly what we see here, is that 3 hours after they're exposed to apivar, 100% of them are dropping. So that's our definition of apivar efficacy. 100% of the mites drop in 3 hours. And the reason why we do that test is because this is more of a natural sort of exposure environment. So the mites are getting exposed from bees walking over a strip, much like they would in the colony. The bottle bioassay test, that's pretty unrealistic in terms of exposure because the mites are coming directly into contact with Amitraz on a glass surface. That's not how they're going to see it in the colony, but it does give us the best toxicological measurements that we can get. Apivar efficacy, it's actually pretty easy to do this test. However, it might not detect resistance until resistance gets very high. So we incorporate these two methods to balance out the weaknesses of each. So there's a number of different advantages and disadvantages to each assay. But when we're using both of them together, we're making sure that we're covering all the pitfalls that might occur. So here, I'll show you that. So on this graph here, we have our different apiaries. So each letter represents a different beekeeping operation, and then different numbers indicate different apiaries within this operation. So this is yard 1 in apiary A, yard 4 in apiary A, apiary 4 in operation A, so on and so forth. So you can see here, and then on this axis, we have the LC50 for Amitraz. So this is a measure of resistance. And so the higher the number, the more resistant. And so if you look down here on this bottom part now, we have what's called the resistance ratio. So we take the LC50 in a commercial beekeeping operation and divide it by the LC50 of our lab population to get this resistance ratio. And as you can see here, we have low levels of resistance, and this is in the bottle bioassay test. We have some apiaries which are just as sensitive as the lab population. We don't get any statistical difference. We then have low levels of Amitraz resistance, between 2 to almost 4-fold resistance. So it takes nearly four times as much Amitraz to kill mites from apiary A2 relative to the lab population. We then get an intermediate level. So this is about from 6 to 10-fold resistance, as you can see here. So apiary C, it takes 9.4 times more Amitraz than the lab population in order to kill 50%. And then in these two populations, this is where we start to see some real changes here. So above 10-fold, so 13 and 22-fold like we show here, these are in red because these are very high levels of resistance, and these are probable Amitraz control failure apiaries. So when we went into them, especially in this B apiary, we found extremely high levels of mites with an active Amitraz treatment. And as you can see here, it's probably because they're highly resistant, over 22 times more Amitraz to kill mites in apiary B than in the lab population. So that's a pretty significant amount more Amitraz in this bee population. So the highest that we found in our sampling has been 22-fold, so 22 times higher. I'm not able to say exactly at this time because I don't have enough data. So what we really want to do is collect more data and ask beekeepers what are their practices. So how do they use Amitraz? What are their overwintering strategies? Where do they migrate? And things like that. Because understanding how those things all work together to breed for Amitraz resistance is going to be what's really important. Because if it means instead of treating 3 times a year, go down to 2 times a year, and that will delay resistance, potentially that's an easy recommendation we could use. We could look at overwintering strategies or broodless strategies for delaying Amitraz resistance. We have to come up with more data to start making some more recommendations. At this time, I don't have enough data to confidently say what beekeepers can do to delay Amitraz resistance. So just real quick, so in this apiary B, these were collected in late July, early August of this year. And so when we went into these operations, they averaged, in that apiary in July, it was averaging 12 mites per 100 bees. We found 2 colonies that had more than 40 mites per 100 bees in July. So in this bee apiary, I think that's a pretty good example of what could happen when there's high levels of Amitraz resistance. Yeah, that's an interesting question. And let me just bring that up real quick because I do have some data on that topic. Okay, so we've been developing this test for a while because before we were going to take it on the road, we wanted to make sure it works in the lab. So we started this in the fall of last year. And so on this graph here, we have mites that were collected from the lab at different dates. So October 18th, 2018, November 1st, 2018, and then in the springtime, April 12th of 2019, and May 30th of 2019. So different collection dates. Earliest to most recent. And then we looked at the Amitraz LC50 value. So this is the amount of Amitraz it takes to kill half the population. And so if we look here in the ones in the fall, we have very similar LC50 values for those 2 dates. When we started this assay up in the springtime, you notice here that the LC50 value is significantly lower. So what that told me was that maybe there's something going on with my formulations. Maybe there's something off with my material. Because usually what happens is if your material degrades, it becomes less toxic. And so this graph should be higher if it was breaking down. So just to make sure I was doing the right thing, I remade stock solutions of Amitraz. So I was starting with fresh material. And you can see here in the spring, in May 30th, I got the very similar LC50 value. So what that's telling me is there's something different about mites in the fall versus mites in the springtime that might make them more or less sensitive to Amitraz. Now, whether that's a nutritional thing of feeding on the pupae or it's something about the mites biology, we're not really sure. So we're hoping to reproduce these findings here in the fall to show that there's less sensitivity in the fall as compared to the spring.
That's interesting. That's very interesting, because that could generate some management models.
Yeah, so it's what that's telling me is that maybe you should use Amitraz in the springtime when they're the most sensitive, potentially. So it's things like that. That's why I keep saying we need more data, but yeah,
More
so
data.
it could be
Definitely
it could
we
be
need more
identifying
data.
as susceptible life stage of the Varroa. So yeah, that's a good point, Umberto. I didn't even think about that until you just mentioned that. I like it.
Yeah, it's definitely something to, management. I'm learning that management is everything in beekeeping, management.
Yeah, yeah. And so that, like I mentioned before about the importance of management, it seems like I mentioned that resistance was restricted within an operation, and then even within colonies in an apiary within an operation. What was interesting about this experiment is that when we tested resistance in these apiaries, we tested some apiaries that were very close by geographically, less than 3 to 5 miles. And what was interesting is that one apiary, we would find 0 mites, and then a nearby one, 3 to 5 miles away, let's say, we found some levels of resistance. So what that's telling me is that resistance is very isolated within an operation. You're not going to get resistant Varroa from your neighbors. That's what the data suggests so far. But then again, this whole scenario, it's a snapshot of what's going on late July and early August. Now that it's getting a little bit more in the fall, I was just out in some bees this week, and some of them are very, very highly infested. So when the bees get infested, they have these different behaviors to compensate. Either they might swarm or they might leave. That might change the whole situation. Maybe it does become more homogeneous when there are colonies failing due to high Varroa infestation. Again, all areas that we need to do more research. I haven't really noticed Amitraz as a source of queen failure, at least in this experiment. We have 2 years of data working with a commercial beekeeper in which we were looking at many, many factors. So one of them was we were measuring queen supersedure between the Varroa sensitive hygienic bees that we have versus the commercial stock. And we didn't really, I don't know if you even looked at it, but the major thing that caused differences in swarming or queen supersedure, let me say that more effectively, queen supersedure seemed to be due to different genetics. We didn't see an effect of Amitraz. I'm not remembering it because I don't think it would test it as a significant value, because what we did in this experiment, we tested, so we had these 2 different genetic stocks, but then we had some that Amitraz was used and Amitraz was not used in another treatment group. So we had some colonies that did not have any Amitraz, and so we had it as a treatment, and I don't think that it was significant in terms of queen supersedure. This is something that it's going to be an ongoing process. I'm starting to build a Varroa resistance monitoring network, and we just need more beekeepers to let us get into their colonies. We can talk about protocols a little bit more, but we go in and sample mites from about 10% of the colonies in an apiary. It's really important that we have people that are using Amitraz in different ways, different times of the year. So the more variation in Amitraz use that we can find within commercial beekeepers is what we really need to find, because if everyone's using it the same, that's not going to really tell us about what conditions lead to Amitraz resistance. We just need to get people to sign up. So if there are people who want to volunteer some bee colonies, you can contact us. We usually get to the industry meetings in January, and we also travel to a number of state meetings as well. So it's just about building relationships and communicating. That's really what we're all about. So we're going to communicate with data that beekeepers could use.
Yeah, USDA is doing great work, but it's something that I have to say, don't get me wrong, but USDA is good to do good work, but it's not good spreading it.
I would agree. I would agree with that.
I have to say that. I worked there for 4 years and I saw a lot of things was done. And when I go to the apiaries, nobody know about.
Yeah. So I go out a lot. So I work with a lot of commercial beekeepers, both here in Louisiana. I just made some really great connections with the people up in New York. And then we have long-standing relationships with other beekeepers across the upper Midwest. We definitely need to get some more representation out in California. As we all know, the importance of California for beekeeping in general in the United States. So more out there. It's just a matter of getting out and doing the work and getting the data. So the more participation we have, the better the data, and the more effective we could help out with this issue. Because I don't want to see Amitraz resistance, because I don't know what we'll do for mite control without it.
I know a couple guys in Florida that will be really interested to join the effort too. So I'll talk with some folks in Florida to help out.
So while we appreciate beekeepers helping us out, we really need more researchers to be on the ground to help out. So these assays are very technically simple. And that's the thing, is anybody who has access to an incubator can do this. It's very cheap and cost effective. So the APIVAR efficacy test, it costs about, from start to finish, all the materials, about $2 per jar.
Mm-hmm.
And what you could do is you could use that as also, if you're going to be monitoring for Varroa mites infestation, you could put them into these jars as a beekeeper and find out a little bit more about them. So if you have mites, are they Amitraz resistant or not? Because when we do that test, we count all the bees and do a mite infestation level. So you're getting that data already. So why not just put it into a cup and get some more qualitative data on your mite infestation levels?
Well, maybe that's another video I need to do, just to demonstrate the assay and teach everybody how to do it.
Yeah, assay is simple. The biggest thing you're going to do is invest some time, 3 hours to do your mite drop. But it does give you a lot of very important information.
Well,
easy, and hopefully more people can adopt it.
You can count on me. I'll visit you very soon. Another video is coming.
All right, great.
All right, I think I cover everything. Do you have anything else to say? I think we have everything regarding I'm gonna leave everything in a link in the description so you can find more about Frank's work at USDA in Baton Rouge. Frank, if you don't have anything else to say, I just wanna say thank you very much for sharing all this information. That's really appreciated.
Well, thank you, Umberto, and I had fun doing this. So anytime you need any other information from me, more than happy to help.
Oh, you shouldn't have said that. All right, make my note now. All right, thank you, Frank. Thank you very much.